Hi guys, John Florez again, and I know, I promised the last video was my last video, but I couldn't help myself. I really couldn't help myself, trust me on this. Over my 18 years in the music business, I had 2 or 3 projects that I was embarrassed. I was embarrassed that I produced. They sounded weak. They sounded really weak. And if you could imagine, if you weren't in the business, you didn't know, but often you were put up against other producers. And I don't care whether that's at the radio station level, where say Harvey Cooper walked into KHJ's program director in Los Angeles and had 2 or 3 records to promote that week. And he would put on one, and then he'd put on mine, and then he'd put on another. And they had to sound competitive, and boy, oh boy, these 3 or 4 cuts didn't. And to the life of me, I've spent my entire life just saying, how did I screw this up so badly? I remember Linda Seals saying to me, he said, John, don't you think that your production style has become sweeter, more lush and less R&B? Now, I was never very R&B, but it was just overly saccharine. And she was right, and I've talked about that before, how a combination of my taste, Darnielle Pershing, who was Johnny Mathis's worldwide conductor and my arranger, and Grover Helsley, who was an orchestral engineer, how, yeah, that can happen. But boy, these were particularly weak. So I want to do, as I described them, I want to do a little before and after on these tracks that I've fixed since I said that I'd done my final YouTube video. I went back over listening to the 100+ tracks that I have remastered over the past 5 years, and I said, oh my, these are still embarrassing. Now, let me do a quick preface. 2 cuts with J.B. Bingham on Warner Brothers Records, Put a Little Love Away and Peekaboo, were really excellent songs and well done by J.B. and the group, but my production was overly sweet and sucked. But I've already fixed those, and I've shown you in detail on a previous episode or 2 how I fixed them. So we put JB's project down as the one I was really very embarrassed by. I'm just so sorry, Letty Wartaker. I'm so sorry that I submitted these to you in a weak form. I could have done so much better with the same tracks. But that having already been taken care of, let's move to what I've just now taken care of. And remember, you're sitting in a KHJ program director's office, and what do you want to hear? The weak version or the strong version? Okay, so I'm going to do befores and afters of various sections of tunes, and I'll also include what I did to them to make them better. And you be the judge. LAX, my vocal group, I just loved, and we pulled off 2 or 3 or 4 of their cuts pretty well, but this one was particularly, I don't know. This song, The Miracle, is one of the best songs that was ever submitted to me. It's in a category all by itself. I could say He Ain't Heavy, He's My Brother, which I had a worldwide exclusive on at the time that was submitted. Freedom for the Stallion, Hughes Corporation, Alan Toussaint tune, absolutely remarkable, another very special tune. A tune I didn't get to record because the Friends of Distinction didn't have time to learn it, and that was for the Highly Distinct album, was Jimmy Webb's Pocket Full of Keys. And I've shown you the lyrics on that tune in previous episodes on how very, very special that was. Every now and then you get a tune that just is far apart from the rest of the tunes that are, say, in your stack of saved tunes that you have as a producer that you want to show your artists. So The Miracle is one of those. I envisioned it as this large, grand, spacious production with power, and unusually enough, the power would come from everything around the singers. Linda Seals and Pat McManus sang the step-out leads on it, and the group sang other parts, usually in unison, but they were to be mellow and the production was to be large. And it wasn't. It was weak and just embarrassing. Okay, so I'm going to show you a couple sections of that now, before and after, show you what I did to them. And at least now I'm no longer embarrassed. In fact, I think on the miracle that I finally achieved what I wanted to 40 years ago, 46 years ago. And I got to tell you, I love this record now, whereas I was absolutely ashamed of it when I produced it. Okay, so this is 1974, the group LAX, and here you go with the befores and afters.
The sun belongs to the sky. The sun belongs to the sky. The leaf belongs to the tree. Isn't it a miracle? It's another miracle. Isn't it a miracle? It's another miracle. I used to think that time was just a thing to pass away. Love was just a game that children play. I used to think that time was just a thing to pass away. Love was just a game that children play. God was just another word to say, and so was something in a song. Isn't it a miracle? It's another miracle. Isn't it a miracle? It's another miracle. Thank God for the miracle. You belong to me. Isn't it a miracle?
Okay, a year later, when LAX was split up by Kip Cohen and given singles deals for Linda Seals and Ron Canoli, Linda Seals' dates were particularly embarrassing because they were too sweet, just like she said. And I remember Darnell and Diane Pershing and Carol and I going to Laguna after the sweetening date and pre-mix down, and my just fretting, worrying on that little weekend vacation on what a shitty job I had done on her tracks. Well, here again, no. The basics were there. The basics were there to make really, really good records. Now I've remastered Leave Me and Third Story Landing. You've heard those before. But Something Borrowed, Something Blue, that Jan Manley from LAX wrote these great lyrics and I wrote the melody. This should have been an excellent tune, and I was unable to fix it until this past week. Finally, it now sounds like the record it should have sounded like in the first place. So here you go, before and after. You're sitting at KHJ with the program director, and Harvey's playing these things. Which one are you going to pick up on? The weak one or the fixed one that is really, really strong? So you tell me. Here we go.
Something sad has hidden in your eyes. We've been here before, haven't we?
Okay, last but not least, I came to an epiphany, and I usually get those out on the road driving around the state for Gateway, but I got it here at home with the virus thing going on and we're all isolated. And it occurred to me that the mixes I did over the period of my 18 years were telling. Where I did the mixes were telling. And I can explain that easily, but wow, it was an epiphany for me. And that is my Wally Heider mixes, which were 5 Flights Up, Linda Seal's initial sessions back in the early 70s, California Sound, that's the early 80s, which would be Linda Seal's again, and finally, Chaton recordings. In Arizona, my best friends, Ed and Marie Ravenscroft, owned that studio, and gosh, they did Lyle Lovett, Paul McCartney, all kinds of people. I mean, a lot of people came to Chaton. And the sessions there were Bobby Brooks and Ellen Harkrader. And these 3 studios that I've mentioned to you, I've hardly had to do anything on the remasters. And here's why. Here's the epiphany. First and foremost, the control rooms that you sit at, behind the console in the recording studio, the control rooms were intimate. They're small, they were extremely flat, meaning acoustically accurate, and they had an intimacy that just got you into the tracks. And I was the primary engineer. The engineers there assisted me. I had my hands on all instruments and all perspectives, and then I coached whoever I was working with on how to raise and lower levels that I just couldn't do at the same time that I was doing the levels that I wanted to deal with. So, number 1, intimacy of studio, and number 2, John hands-on, taking over the style, the perspective of the mixing, how loud in particular the snare drum and drum track was in relationship to everything. The snare drum, toms, bass drum, all of that perspective, and compressing the mixes before going to mastering. I didn't do that. I didn't do that before. And I know I can share the example as the alternative of the big rooms I worked in. And that's RCA Studio B and primarily RCA Studio A. And the studios themselves were auditorium size, and the control rooms were really massive. And they set you back from the sound. You were further away from the speakers. There was an expanse all around you. There was no intimacy. And the engineer at RCA was Grover, so that's going to make stuff sound a little sweeter. And he was the primary person who, with a little coaching from me, would set up the perspective of the instruments. But he did 90% of the levels in mixing these tracks. And I did the vocals, just the vocals. So this many years later, gosh, 40 to 50 years later, I'm saying, gosh, I love the intimate studios. And secondly, I needed to be more hands-on, because even without all the crap, pardon the expression, that I've added to some of these tracks that you've just heard, even without it, the mixes would have been a ton more powerful had I just done my thing as primary mixing engineer and been in those intimate rooms. I want to do a postscript. 2 times in the last 3 months, I have heard, once directly from the artist herself, and another time, yesterday, was the birthday of another one of my artists, and I didn't know that, and one of her friends and said, played her the 2 cuts that you did, what was this, early 70s, and that the artist, she cried when she heard those cuts. Now, I've told you guys, I did this experiment on YouTube, first to tell my story, and second, just to make the stuff sound better. But the bonus has been you guys responding to my thoughts, opinions, and styles and production techniques. But also, a bunch of the people that have shared, not just listeners, but in many times the artists themselves, who have shared how touched they are to hear their product improved this many years later, and how it takes them right back to where we were decades ago, and it touched their hearts. Believe me, it touches mine. It brings a tear to my eye. So you guys take care. As always, thanks for watching.